If you have ever been to Romania, then you have most likely seen this beautiful cathedral. From the outside, it looks like just an ordinary building, but if not for one little detail. If you look closely, on one of the walls, there is this inscription, and in fact, that is the main difference between it and all the other cathedrals. Behind this inscription, inside the cathedral walls, there is literally a woman who was sealed alive. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe. It really helps the channel grow. In the year 1880, a prince was traveling with his subjects and craftsmen along the river, and he was dreaming about building his personal cathedral. He wanted this cathedral to be the very best one on earth. Yes, the prince was a little vain, you could say. And at some point, as they were passing an unfinished building, they decided that this would be the very place for the construction of the cathedral. And here the prince suddenly had a very strange idea, which in fact became the beginning of all the horror in this story. He told his craftsmen to build him a cathedral, and if it turned out to be the greatest in the world, he would shower them with gold, but if not, then he would bury them alive in the walls of this cathedral. The craftsmen, of course, were completely shocked, but they grabbed their shovels and began to build. But no matter how hard they tried, nothing worked. Every morning, when they woke up and came to work, they saw that everything they had built the previous day had collapsed. But they did not lose hope, and every morning they started building again. This went on for 4 days, and when all the craftsmen, the poor men, were already completely exhausted, one of them decided to rest and went to sleep. His name was Master Manol, and while the other craftsmen were working on the cathedral, Master Manol saw an unusual dream, which looked more like a vision. So, in the morning they woke up, came to the construction site, and once again saw that the cathedral had collapsed during the night. All the craftsmen were already desperate, but Master Manol said, "Brothers, I had a very strange dream." He said that in his dream he heard a certain voice from above, which told him that in order for the cathedral to be completed, it was necessary to seal alive the wife of one of the craftsmen inside the walls of this cathedral. But there was one very important condition. It had to be the wife who would be the first in the morning to bring them breakfast. All the craftsmen, of course, were horrified by such a plan and tried in every possible way to talk him out of it. But Manol was convinced that this was not just a dream, and that it had to be done exactly as it had been shown to him. And then something happened that Manol expected the least. The craftsman looked out into the field and saw that on the horizon a woman was coming, and it turned out to be none other than the wife of Manol himself. Naturally, he immediately changed his mind, fell on his knees, and began to beg God to send her back home. All the way, as she was walking, he was praying that she would turn back, and that somehow everything would pass by. At some moment, he even started to think that maybe all this was another dream, and that he would wake up in a cold sweat. The next morning came, and the prince stood in front of the greatest cathedral in the world. On it there was only one inscription: "Here lies the wife of the great Master Manol." Surely you may think that there is a positive moment in this story, because the prince should now reward the craftsman with gold as he had promised. But in fact, not quite so. When the prince saw this cathedral, he was overjoyed, stood there for a long time admiring it. The craftsman at that moment was sitting on the roof of the cathedral, receiving his compliments, and then the prince asked them, "Masters, is this the greatest cathedral in the world?" They answered, "Of course, Prince, we are the best builders in the world." And then the prince asked another question: "If you are such great craftsmen, could you build another cathedral, even greater than this one?" They answered, "Of course, Prince, whatever you wish." And then the prince, after thinking for a while, gave an order to cut down all the scaffolding, leaving the craftsmen sitting on the roof, without gold, without food, and in the end without their lives. And as ironic as it sounds, Manol died there, at the very same cathedral where his wife had died. And for several days, it was said that you could hear from these walls her voice calling for him to help her. That day for this girl did not begin with coffee. She was working as a teacher at school, and on that day, as usual, she was walking to work, imagining how she would sit calmly in her office and begin checking the students' notebooks, finding mistakes in their homework. But on that day, she was about to find something much greater, a mysterious murder that no one has been able to solve for more than 30 years. This happened in Japan in 1989, in one of the schools of Fukushima. A 23-year-old girl was working as a teacher there, and she became the center of this whole story. On one of the school days, she walked into the building and met her colleagues. While she was talking with them, one of them was complaining about how tired she was of the students constantly clogging the toilets. Supposedly, in one of them, the water had not been draining for the whole day, and it was impossible to use. Our heroine, let's call her Megan, since I don't know her real name, paid little attention to this story and went to her office, thinking that now she would sit down quietly, rest before her lessons, and drink some coffee. But things were not so simple. A few minutes later, a janitor walked into her office. He had already shown interest in her more than once, and he started again, complimenting her and offering to walk her home after class. She really didn't like this, and while he was showering her with compliments, she remembered the clogged toilet and told him, "Look, friend, since you're a janitor, why don't you go and fix the toilet instead?" Basically, she tried to push him away. The janitor, of course, agreed to unclog it, but asked Megan to show him exactly which door was blocked. Megan went in first, trying to remember which one her colleague had mentioned. She opened stall after stall until she saw the one. She was already about to call the janitor so he could fix it, but then she noticed something strange. In addition to the water and other filth, something else was sticking out of the toilet. Something that looked like a human shoe. Coming closer, she realized it wasn't a shoe at all, but literally a human foot. It was so horrible and disgusting that Megan nearly threw up when she saw it. Apparently, this was not just a clog in the toilet, but a murder scene. Despite all their efforts, even the firefighters couldn't pull the leg out of the toilet. Then the police arrived, and they also tried to do it, using a drill to bore a large hole through the toilet. When they drilled the opening and looked inside, what they saw was too much even for the police. They were shocked. None of them had ever seen anything like this. And I'll tell you even more. Even I have never come across anything like this, despite how many stories I've read. Inside that toilet, it wasn't just a leg, but the entire body of a person. And even if you don't ask who killed him and why in such a way, the question remained, how could anyone manage to squeeze a body into such a narrow space? There are so many inconsistencies in this case that simply cannot be explained logically. As I already mentioned, in Japan they still haven't solved this case even after 34 years. And here is what remains unexplained: the position of the body at the moment of discovery. It was stuffed into the toilet in such a way that it is simply impossible to understand how much force would be needed to push a man inside. Just so you understand, the diameter of the toilet opening was 36.2 centimeters, while the width of the victim's shoulders was 40 centimeters. Of course, it's possible that he was forced in, but in that case his shoulders or at least some bones should have been broken. But the strangest thing is that his body hardly had any scratches at all, let alone fractures. And that is not even the strangest part. The fact is that when the autopsy was performed, the coroner established that he did not die from any injuries, but from hypothermia, and directly inside the toilet. That means that he was still alive at the moment when he was pushed inside. And perhaps the most bizarre detail of all, when the man was found in the toilet, he was completely naked, holding a perfectly folded shirt in his hands. First of all, it is very hard to imagine a person being able to fold a shirt neatly in such a cramped space. And secondly, why would he even do this when he was stuffed into a toilet? And why was he naked in the middle of winter, when it was very cold outside? The most shocking thing is that not a single one of these mysteries has ever been solved by the Japanese authorities, and the case remains open to this day. Maybe you have your own theories about this, write them in the comments. The next story is just as ridiculous as it is horrifying. This old man's name was Kenneth Pinion, and he was the one responsible for his own tragic death. But in fact, not only he was to blame, but also his psychological problems. And you cannot even imagine what kind they were. This happened in 2005. Kenneth was 45 years old at the time. He was working at a good position in an airline company. He had a wife, friends, in general, everything like an ordinary person. But at some point, Kenneth's friends began to notice that he started leaving work early. And soon, they didn't like it anymore, because they were basically doing his work for him. So they decided to follow him and find out where he was going after work. As it turned out, he often went to a horse farm and spent a lot of time there. He came there with a camera and an operator, apparently to film some kind of documentary about horses, or at least that's what his friends thought. But in reality, they were deeply mistaken. Later, they began to casually ask Kenneth about his hobbies, and he would tell them about anything except horses. They couldn't understand what was so special about horses and why he was hiding this hobby. And here we come to the most horrifying and, in a way, the most disgusting part. Definitely not content for children. And here we come to the most horrifying and, in a way, the most disgusting part. Definitely not content for children. The fact is, Kenneth's passion for horses did not stop at simply riding them or stroking their manes. Well, stroking might actually be part of the process. It turned out that Kenneth loved horses so much that in return the horses loved him too. Or rather, he forced them to. When he came to the stables, he filmed every one of his sexual acts with a mare and uploaded the videos to the internet. And as we know, the internet never forgets. Those disturbing videos remain online to this day. Later, it was discovered that in some underground forums on the internet, he was even considered an expert in sexual acts with horses. This went on for a long time, until one day, he encountered an Arabian stallion named Bullseye. After forcing the horse to love him, Kenneth began to feel unwell, but he didn't tell anyone because he was still hiding his horse-related inclinations. For several hours he felt excruciating pain in his lower body, but he still didn't call an ambulance, fearing that if anyone found out, he would lose his job, his friends, and most likely his wife. Though honestly, I don't even know if that could be considered cheating, but eventually Kenneth could not stand the pain anymore and called some acquaintances, who drove him to the hospital. The doctors, although shocked by what they saw and heard, still tried to provide him with first aid. But on the way to surgery, Kenneth Pinion died of peritonitis. You can Google what that is, though I would not recommend it. So in fact, his beloved horse became the reason for his death. Of course, it is sad for Kenneth, because although he had psychological disorders and forced the horses into such things, he still did not deserve such a painful death. Surely, if he had shared his secrets with his friends, they might have somehow helped him. But the most unfair thing in this whole story is that after the incident, the horse was also castrated, even though he was not guilty of anything at all. The horse had not shown any initiative, and yet he ended up without his organs. It is just strange, because Kenneth looked like a completely ordinary, adequate man. Look at his photo and imagine. If you had seen him behind the counter in a store, would you ever have thought that he had such interests? In general, the moral of the story is this: love animals, but don't overdo it.